While he was telling me about what a great time he had, I couldn't help but remember my weird experience while camping in the woods. I am writing this from memory, so I apologize if it's a bit disjointed. In the year 2000, I was living in my home country of England. I just turned 23, and had just gone through a difficult breakup, losing my home and girlfriend. Needless to say, I was pretty depressed, moping around my parents' house for a few months while working in a dead-end job. One of my older colleagues would always ask me what I had done the previous weekend, which was usually nothing. He told me that he had gone wild camping from Friday through Sunday in the forest area north of my town. The way he told the story of camping under the stars, building a fire, and getting away from it all really seemed to be something I needed to do. I had always loved camping as a young child and teenager, but I had always been accompanied by friends or family. The prospect of camping alone filled me with intrigue and excitement for the first time in months. I asked him to specify the kind of equipment I would need and set off to the camping outdoor store after work. My week was filled with planning where I would go. I bought ordnance survey maps, which allow me to identify interesting places that my colleague had mentioned, and to find the easiest way there by public transport, as I didn't have a car. On the Friday, I brought the minimal amount of camping equipment with me to work, and left a few hours early. I picked up my stuff and headed to the bus stop to take the bus, which would leave me at the closest possible location to where I intended to camp. I can remember, quite vividly, the feeling of calm as the bus trundled along a small country lane. The golden light of the evening streamed in through the windows, feeling the warmth on my face. I felt happy, excited, and alive. The depression that I had been feeling had dissipated. At my stop, I hopped off the bus, pulling out my map and compass, and made my way towards my intended destination. The walk took me approximately 1.5 hours to find the area where I had thought about camping. It looked a bit too open for my liking, so I continued onwards about another 10 to 15 minutes, until I found a place that was more enclosed. The late afternoon and evening was uneventful. I pitched the tent, cooked some food that I brought with me on the little gas stove. I laid on the grass and enjoyed the peace and quiet. I remember feeling sleepy as it got around 10 p.m., so I climbed into bed and read by torchlight. Around 4 hours later, at about 2 a.m., I am awoken from a deep sleep by a noise in the distance directly over my head. I feel disorientated, unaware of where I am or even what the noise is. I remember thinking, why is he crying again? Half asleep, thinking it was my little brother, who I would go to when he cried later at night as children. Then suddenly, I bolt myself upright, a shock of remembering where I was, and that it was not my brother. With the adrenaline pumping, I could even hear my own pulse. I strained myself to make out the noise in the distance. It was on and off, changing in duration, intensity, and volume. I told myself that it must be an animal, and this reduced the anxiety somewhat. I laid back down and checked the time on my watch, 2:15 a.m. Try as I might, I could not fall back to sleep. I must have been laying there for 10 minutes, when out of nowhere the noise started again. Closer, louder, weirder. I felt the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. This time it sounded like crying, but also like they were hyperventilating. It continued for a few minutes and stopped suddenly. I started to wonder, perhaps a walker got lost in the woods and became distraught. I began to hear a sort of banging sound, like someone hitting a tree with a blunt metal object. Just once at first, and then it became continuous and intense, as though someone wanted to knock down a tree with a metal bat. The noise comes to a stop, and so does my breathing. I hold my breath, my heart beating furiously. I suddenly feel really exposed. The flimsy tent giving no feeling of security. As I'm starting to calm myself down, a blood-curdling scream echoes through the woods and the clearing. I sit bolt upright. My instincts tell me to rip open the tent and just run in the opposite direction to where the sound originates. However, I stop myself from acting rashly. The scream was definitely a man. Reflecting on the sound, the only way I can describe it is that it was full of anger, disgust, agony, and hopelessness, like someone in the pit of despair. There is total silence. I can hear some murmuring, like babbling coming from my east. Again, another scream. Then the man shouts, "Why? Why, Greg? Why?" This is accompanied by the intense crying again, along with what sounds like nonsensical babbling. However, I can make out a few words which from memory were fire, soil, and sky. I can hear this so clearly now. This meant a few things. I knew that they were moving towards a deeper part of the forest, but also that they may come across me in my tent. "Why, Greg? Why did you do it? Why did you do it? Fuck you. Fuck you, Greg." I heard the babbling getting louder. At first, I thought that they were just talking louder, but then heard the breaking of twigs beneath their feet. They sounded like the person was stumbling, sometimes falling to their knees and hitting the ground with something and then getting back up. At this point, I was crouched in the tent, my senses strained to hear and to sense where they are. Then it just stopped. I didn't hear any more footsteps, babbling, screaming, or anything like that. It was like the man just evaporated. I remember checking my watch, and it was 3 a.m. After a few minutes, I unzipped the tent in the most noiseless way possible and slipped out. I crouched on the grass beside the tent, silently surveying the area where the noise had come from. While still dark, the moon gave some shine to the area. I saw absolutely nothing. There were no noises at all. I think that I crouched there for maybe 10 minutes just staring. Having seen nothing, I climbed back into my tent and laid there trying to process the whole thing. The weird thing was that after some time, I remember thinking that it was over. In fact, I felt very peaceful. I must have fallen asleep at some point after this, as the next thing I knew, the sun was up and streaming through the tent. I got up hurriedly, shoving my stuff into the backpacks and getting ready to go home. I started to make my way back to the bus stop. As I left, I looked around for any signs of someone having been there during the night. In my peripheral vision, I noticed what looked to be a black bag on top of a brush of ferns. Despite my experience, my curiosity got the better of me and I went to check. It was not a bag, but an old leather bomber jacket. It was in really bad condition, but I was sure it had not been there as I walked through the day before. I didn't want to touch it, but wanted to see if there was anything inside it. So I picked up a stick and flipped it over. I was shocked to see what looked like a big mallet which is normally rubber or wood. Instead, this one was made of metal. After seeing that, I just wanted to go. I more or less ran through the woods and back to the bus stop. After reaching my town, I went to the police and informed them. As there was no real crime, they gave me a kind of funny glance and gave me a reference number. It's been so many years since this, but I remember it all so vividly. I cannot imagine why anyone would be walking through a forest that was quite remote at 2 to 3 a.m. The whole thing was so weird that when I told my friends, they just laughed. I don't live in the UK anymore, but Looney from the local woods. Let us not meet again. 2. A little background on me. When this happened, I was about 6 feet and had quite a broad figure due to me playing rugby quite a lot. A little background on Lucas. When this happened, he was about 5'5" and very slim and had the cutest face I'd ever seen. In high school, there was a guy who I found extremely attractive and cute. I'll call him Lucas for now. At the time, I was 16 and so was he. He was in a few of my classes, maybe 3 or 4. I'd always wanted to talk to him and get to know him, but with me being in the closet, the massive fear of rejection, and not knowing whether he was gay either, I decided to just admire him from afar, rather than to pursue him. As time went by throughout the term, I started to notice him staring at me more and more in the classes we had together. At first I was happy he noticed me, to be honest, but it started to make me uncomfortable and self-conscious. I pretended not to notice, since it would have been embarrassing for both of us if we made eye contact during him staring. Half-term came around, a 2-week break if you don't know what that is, and I wasn't thinking much about Lucas at this point. We came back to school, and in our psychology class, we were paired for group activities and sat next to each other. I didn't really know how I felt about it. We didn't talk for the first few lessons, but when group activities and case study practicing came around, it was a must. On our first activity, I started the talking. He reacted normally, but being close to him made my heart pound like crazy, because he was exactly my type, and even cuter up close. A few lessons passed of us normally talking about the work, etc. When he came out of the blue and asked for my number, I was pretty much in shock. I asked for what reason. He replied, "Just curious. You don't have to give it." I, of course, gave it to him. By this point, I had completely forgotten about how strange his staring was from when he used to sit away from me. As school ended, he began to text me normally, asking how I was, etc. The only thing I found strange was how fast his replies were, even if mine were a few minutes late. Lucas didn't have Facebook or anything on social media, and whenever I saw him around school, he was alone, reading old or tatty books. This began to raise the courage within me to ask if he was gay or not, considering how interested he was in me. I waited for a good opportunity to ask. After I sent this text, it was about 2 minutes before I got a response. I did notice this because the latest any of his other replies were only by 10 seconds, no exaggeration. His reply was, "Yes, does that bother you?" I decided to tell him I was too, in the heat of the moment. I was truly happy that he was willing to be open about it with me, and I thought I should do the same. He replied with, "Oh, cool," smiley face. This is where things took a turn. He began to send 5 or more text messages in a row about where I was, whether I wanted him to go away, etc. if I hadn't replied after maybe 5 minutes or so. But after I reply, he would go back to being sweet and friendly. Half-term had come once again, and I was ready to start hitting parties. One night I left for the party with my phone, but realized the plug to the charger hadn't been inserted, so it was dead. I didn't realize this until during the car ride to the party. I forgot about it, and drank until I became tipsy. The party finished, and I walked home with some good friends for part of the journey, but had to follow a path through a reasonably small woods. I didn't even think of being scared since I've done it a million times before during the night. But less than halfway across the path, I heard someone whispering in a bush right beside where I needed to walk. I truly felt my heart clench. I tried not to react much because I didn't want them to realize I was there. The whispering was repetitive and getting louder. I was contemplating what to do. Do I turn back or try to get past without this guy noticing? I had to make a split-second decision and thought it would have been dumb to walk all this way and turn back over maybe some homeless man, etc. I still attempted to walk by without them hearing me. As I was walking, the whispering stopped. The leaves began to rustle, but slowly, as if something was moving slowly inside the bush. I should have begun to run at that point, but I was frozen in fear of the unknown. I had no idea what was in that bush. It was too clear to me that the thing had noticed me. I remember the overwhelming feeling of hesitation to run, fearing that it would cause it to lunge at me. I waited for about 10 seconds after the rustling, stood there. A black figure arose slowly, wearing a black hoodie with the hood covering the moonlight from reaching its face. It was quite short and slim, so I didn't think I'd have a problem taking it. But it lifted its arm, revealing a kitchen knife covered in red liquid that seemed to be blood. The mere sight of this sent me into panic, and I began to sprint straight home. I looked back and the figure was out in the path, stood so I could see its whole figure. When I reached home, I didn't take a second to breathe and woke my parents up to tell them what happened. My dad called the police whilst I was looking through the blinds in our kitchen, discreetly, to see whether anyone was out there. The next morning, we were told nothing was found, but they would look into it. I checked my phone. Since I'd been away from it for a while, I had over 200 messages from Lucas, exclaiming how if he couldn't have me, no one could. He then went on to say how he knew my route home and he'd be waiting to show me how much he was devoted to me. I was freaking out, and I decided to show the messages to my parents, and they gave the information to the police. The first day back at school, he wasn't in. The same happened for the next few weeks. No one really noticed because he didn't have any friends though. I never asked my parents what happened to him since it was a very difficult time. The messages were how they found out I was gay, so I don't talk about it much. After asking the teachers if they knew anything, I noticed they all became clammy when the situation popped up and avoided answering at all costs. I decided not to ask anymore because it seemed to make everyone uncomfortable. And to be honest, I wasn't sure if I wanted to know what happened to him. I'll never know whose blood was on that knife, whether it even was blood. If so, I assume it was his own. I am now 20 and in university. To me now, this is a distant memory. I know this wasn't as bad as some of the stories on here, but to me, it was a truly terrifying part of my life. 3. This happened 4 years ago when I was in grade 8 and my little brother was in grade 4. Back in grade 8, my brother and I would walk to school together every day. This started in, from what I recall, April, and of course involves a fucking white van. Me and my brother were off to school, walking down a relatively busy street, and the last street before the street the school is on. Always cars going up and down, with houses on both sides of the street, and always a lot of kids and their parents walking to the school also. I noticed a white van. Immediately made me skeptical, driving down the road when I turned around to see what the car was driving by. When it drove towards us, it slowed down a little bit, right beside us, then sped off. The same thing happened on the way to school the next 3 days. I started to get kinda pissed at this guy. It is now a Friday before the weekend. Yay! I'm walking to school with my brother. My little brother gets ahead of me because I had to tie my shoe, and what do you know? The white van pulls up and slows down right beside my little bro. I immediately look at the license plate as I was getting prepared for the van to show up. I get the license plate number onto my phone so I won't lose it. The van speeds off again. This really started to creep me out like 8 times more than it did before. I didn't let my little brother out of my sight the rest of the walk there, and asked him if he noticed that van always slowing down beside him. And he said, yeah, it's kinda weird. I guess at his age he didn't know the gravity of the situation we were in. After school the same day, I'm walking home with 3 other friends, and my little bro is like 15 feet ahead of us. My friends and I are just talking about stupid shit, and I notice the white van drive by. I take a glance at the license plate, same one as earlier. I immediately call my brother's name. Noah, come here and walk with us. He turns around, walks with me and my friends. I told him the white van just drove by, so watch out if you see it. I told my friends all about this fucking creepy white van, and my friend Troy says he has my back no matter what. We go through the weekend without anything happening with the white van, so I suppose he doesn't know where we live. It is now Monday morning, again walking to school. But we both see no white van on the way there. I'm thinking to myself that maybe the guy has finally stopped for the love of all that is holy. Until we get to the school and I see the white van parked on the other side of the street. My little brother didn't notice, and I didn't tell him because I didn't want to make him scared. Now I'm really fucking pissed. He has the nerve to creep on my little bro like that, and now fucking creep on him at our fucking school. I immediately go to Troy and my other friend Brady and ask them if they remember the white van. They say yes, and I tell them that it's parked right down the street. I ask them to come with me to confront him. They both say yes. So we walk up to the van and Troy knocks on the window, and the man rolls it down. He's wearing a cap, sunglasses, and has a grey beard, breathing really heavily for some reason. I immediately get some creepy as fuck vibes from the prick. I decide to take out my house key and wrap the lanyard around my hand. and put the key in between my pointer finger and middle finger, just in case something happens. Troy asks him in these exact words in a pretty intimidating voice. Would you like to explain why you're such a fucking asshole and following his little brother to school every fucking day? Huh, prick? Please explain. The man immediately turns on his truck and drives off. Doesn't even say a single word. I yell, "That's right, you fucking pussy bitch." Drive off like the fucking cock muncher you are. That felt really, really fucking good. When we got back to school, I told my teacher about the van, and he says he will keep a watch every morning. We didn't see the van the rest of the day. The next day I arrive at school and my little bro, and I notice again that the fucking van is there again. As I walk up to my teacher, he asks me if that is the van I was talking about. I say yes, and the school immediately called the police, and they show up. The school is basically in a court, so there is only one way through vehicle transportation, so there was nowhere for the prick to go. The police confront him, and guess what? We never see the fucking prick again. Thank the Holy Spirit. The police told my mom, and she got extremely mad at me for not telling her. As she told me she would rip his balls off before he even saw her coming. I felt like such an idiot for not calling the police or telling someone else earlier, as it would have taken care of the situation much earlier. But I'm happy that he got taken care of, because I didn't know what I would do if my little bro got taken away by some pedophile. And I can't think about what would have happened to him if he had been taken by him. I also have my friends to thank for at least trying to help. Me, Troy, and Brady are still best buds, and we hang out a lot. They'll always be my brothers from other mothers. I hope for his sake that I never see that prick again. Or I might actually kill the guy, because the world would be better without those assholes.